Have you ever wondered how some of the world's most dangerous criminals have managed to escape from maximum security prisons? From underground tunnels and coconut rafts to dummy heads and toy guns, the ingenious plots behind these prison escapes will leave you in awe. According to the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics, thousands of people attempt to escape from prison each year, but only a select few have managed to pull off truly legendary escapes. Join us as we delve into the details of the greatest prison escapes of all time, and prepare to have your mind blown by the lengths that some individual will go to gain their freedom. It was a morning that would go down in history. On June 12, 1962, guards at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary were left stunned when they discovered that 3 inmates, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, had managed to escape from the notorious prison. This daring feat left authorities scratching their heads, as Alcatraz was known as The Rock for its heavily guarded location over 1.25 miles off San Francisco's coast. But the story of Alcatraz is far from ordinary. The prison, which had held prisoners since the Civil War, was refortified in 1934 and became infamous for its ability to hold some of the most dangerous criminals of the time, including Al Capone during the peak of organized crime. With iron bars on every cell, armed guards at every outpost, and the choppy waters of the Pacific Ocean just beyond, escaping from Alcatraz seemed like a feat that was impossible to achieve. Over the course of almost 3 decades, 13 escape attempts had failed, making it one of the most secure prisons in the world. But for Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, the seemingly impossible task didn't stop them from trying. Against all odds, they made their escape on June 11, 1962, just a year before the prison closed its doors for good. Morris led the way, and their intricate plan had been in the works for months. Frank Morris, a notorious career burglar and armed robber, was one of the brightest inmates at Alcatraz. He recruited car thief Alan West and the Anglin brothers to join his scheme. For over 6 months, the group worked tirelessly to enlarge the ventilation ducts in their cells, using spoons and saw blades they had stolen. Morris even played his accordion at night to cover up the noise. Using cardboard to conceal the enlarged ducts, they built papier-mâché dummy heads to trick the guards. The group even made a raft out of raincoats and stored it in a utility tunnel. When the time came to make their escape, West was left behind when he couldn't remove the grill on his ventilation duct. Morris and the Anglin brothers managed to slide down a pipe from the roof of the prison and make it to the shore undetected, where they inflated their raft and made their getaway. The FBI closed the case in 1979, declaring the men dead. But rumors persisted that the trio had successfully escaped. In fact, in 2012, the Anglin brothers' sisters claimed that they had received a call from Clarence indicating that he was still alive. Richard Lee McNair was not a typical prison escapee. Instead, he employed an innovative and unconventional method to regain his freedom by mailing himself out of jail. Although the convicted murderer was eventually apprehended and confined in a maximum security facility, his resourcefulness was truly remarkable. As a child, McNair displayed a remarkable intellect and was raised by a police officer. However, he later used his talents to rob a grain storage facility in Minot, North Dakota on November 17, 1987, during which he shot 2 men who startled him, one of whom died of their injuries. McNair was subsequently found guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder, resulting in 2 life sentences, with an additional 30 years added to his sentence for burglary. McNair was determined to escape his prison confines, and while incarcerated at North Dakota State Penitentiary, he managed to break through a ventilation pipe in 1992. However, he was captured the following year. However, on April 5, 2006, McNair made a prison escape attempt at a federal prison in Pollock, Louisiana, which would ultimately establish him as a truly notable prison escapist. He constructed a makeshift compartment, complete with a breathing tube, and squeezed himself inside it, positioning himself next to a stack of mail bags that were later transported by forklift to a nearby warehouse outside the prison. McNair recounted, "The heat was unbearable. Inside the pod, it felt like a furnace. Sweat poured off me. My head was swimming in a daze. I was afraid I might pass out. It was a tight squeeze and I couldn't wipe the sweat from my forehead. It was streaming into my eyes, down my neck, and dripping from the tip of my nose and every other place." When the warehouse personnel left for lunch, McNair made his move. Even though a police officer caught him running down nearby railroad tracks, McNair convinced the cop that he was not the prison escapee authorities were looking for. McNair remained on the run until late 2007 when he was apprehended for driving a stolen vehicle. McNair was promptly reincarcerated and is currently serving time in a Colorado Supermax prison, where he shares space with high-profile inmates such as Boston bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. Given the circumstances, it seems unlikely that McNair will be able to deceive his captors again. Frank Abagnale's life as a check forger was captured in Steven Spielberg's 2002 film Catch Me If You Can. He successfully posed as a Pan American Airlines pilot and a Brigham Young University professor, and cashed more than $2 million in fraudulent checks. After being apprehended in Montpellier, France, in 1969, he spent 6 months in a regional prison and another 6 months in Sweden before being deported to the United States. Subsequently, Abagnale received a 12-year sentence at the Federal Detention Center in Atlanta, Georgia. However, in 1971, he managed to escape due to the U.S. Marshal transporting him for getting his detention papers. During a time when prisons were heavily scrutinized by civil rights groups and congressional committees, Abagnale exploited the absence of official inmate documentation to make his escape. Realizing that the guards suspected he might be a prison inspector contracted by the FBI, Abagnale took action. He was granted permission to use the phone and contacted his friend John Sebring outside the prison to help him forge a fake business card with the necessary credentials. Sebring reportedly used a card provided by FBI agent John Shea as a template and replaced Shea's contact details with Abagnale's. The conman received the forged card in his prison mail, which he used to reveal himself to the guards as a prison inspector, much to their delight as their suspicions were confirmed. With a forged card in his possession and enough trust established with the guards, Abagnale requested to borrow a car to meet with an associate outside the prison. The guards obliged, and Abagnale escaped. However, he was eventually apprehended in Washington, D.C. 2 months later and served another 4-year prison sentence. While Abagnale's story was famously portrayed in Hollywood, journalist Alan C. Logan argues that it lacks substantiation. Others believe that institutions such as the Federal Detention Center would prefer to label their mistakes as hoaxes rather than admit to their incompetence. Henri Charrière was born in Saint-Étienne-de-la-Glace, France in 1906, and briefly served in the Navy before turning to a life of crime. Known as Papillon because of the butterfly tattoo on his chest, he became recognized as a proficient safecracker and gangster. Nonetheless, it is still debated whether he was responsible for the murder that led to his imprisonment. According to Charrière's autobiography Papillon and its 1973 Hollywood adaptation, he was convicted of murdering Paris pimp Roland Legrand in 1931. Charrière maintained that he was framed by a corrupt justice system, but he was ultimately sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in Cayenne, French Guiana. Cayenne, also referred to as Devil's Island, was a penal colony located approximately 7 miles off the mainland coast that accommodated all kinds of inmates from 1852 to 1953. Unfortunately, 40% of the prisoners sent there perished. Desperate to escape, Charrière befriended inmates Jonas Clouseau and André Maturet and managed to flee in November 1933. The 3 men bolted, seizing an available boat and drifting for almost 2,000 miles for 5 days until they shipwrecked in Colombia. Despite a brief recapture, Charrière managed to slip away from authorities during a fortuitous storm, making his way north to the Guajira Peninsula. Charrière asserted in his book that he spent months in the northern Colombia region and was harbored by an indigenous tribe in the jungle. However, he was soon recaptured and subjected to 2 years of solitary confinement, during which he made at least 7 escape attempts. For the guards, their presence was almost unnecessary. Any prisoner attempting to swim to the mainland would face the risk of shark attacks or drowning. Furthermore, failure in recapture would result in solitary confinement. Despite these hazards, Charrière was undeterred. In 1944, he fashioned a raft from coconuts and set sail once more. Charrière eventually washed up on the Guiana coast, only to be incarcerated for a year. Upon release, he was granted citizenship and relocated to Venezuela, where he authored one of the most celebrated autobiographies about a prison escape. Born on April 4, 1957 in La Tuna, Mexico, Joaquin Guzman rose to infamy as El Chapo. Although the moniker derived from his short stature at 5'6", he later became one of the most feared drug lords worldwide after establishing the infamous Sinaloa cartel in the mid-1980s and taking over the drug trade. Guzman gained notoriety not only for his criminal activities, but also for his exceptional talent for escaping prison. In June 1993, he was arrested for the first time but managed to continue running his criminal operations from inside the maximum security prison, Puente Grande, with ease. However, he suddenly disappeared on January 19, 2001. Given the high levels of corruption and the risk of retribution from the cartel, Guzman bribed the guards in charge. One of them, later identified as Francisco Camberos Rivera, helped Guzman out of his cell and into a laundry cart. Then Rivera pushed Guzman to the parking lot and placed him in the trunk of a car. The news shocked authorities worldwide, but it was nothing compared to Guzman's escape in 2015. Having been responsible for 15 more murders and assassinations, El Chapo was regarded as the most powerful drug trafficker in the world. His second escape was even more astounding and intricate than the first, leaving many in utter disbelief. After being arrested in Mazatlan on February 22, 2014, and held in Altiplano Federal Prison, Guzman disappeared the following July. He climbed through a small hole beneath one of the showers and made his way through a secret tunnel that the cartel had been digging for months. The tunnel spanned almost a mile and was built according to Guzman's specifications. It included lights, ventilation, and even a motorcycle for him to ride out on. Although his escape from another maximum security prison was a significant embarrassment for those in charge, Guzman's freedom was short-lived. He was arrested in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, 6 months later and eventually extradited to the United States. In July 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison. In the aftermath of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, 16-year-old Leonard Moses joined the 1968 Pittsburgh riots. On April 6th, he made a fateful decision that would alter the course of his life forever. Moses threw Molotov cocktails at the home of Mary Amplo, a local resident. Tragically, Mary died a few months later from pneumonia caused by the burns she suffered that day. Moses was charged with first-degree murder, setting off a legal battle that would last for years. The once idealistic young man found himself facing a harsh reality, and his life would never be the same. Despite his youth, he was swiftly convicted by a jury and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. However, his legal team refused to give up the fight for justice. In 1971, they brought the case before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, arguing that Moses' confession to the authorities was inadmissible in court. They argued that the young teenager was not capable of fully understanding his rights and the implications of speaking to the police without an attorney present. After the Supreme Court determined that Moses deserved a new trial, he decided to take matters into his own hands and avoid any risks. Instead of attempting a conventional prison break, he took advantage of temporary leave. When granted permission to attend his grandmother's funeral, he disappeared. On July 1, 1971, accompanied by 2 police officers, Moses attended the service at Nazarene Baptist Church in the Homewood neighborhood of Pittsburgh. However, he managed to slip away unnoticed, and a federal arrest warrant was issued on July 12th. Moses remained a fugitive for the next 5 decades, despite the FBI's awareness that he was likely living under an alias. In Michigan, where he worked as a pharmacist, Moses was arrested for stealing 80 hydrocodone pills, and local authorities discovered his true identity when they matched his fingerprints to those from his 1968 arrest. The FBI arrested him on November 12, 2020, ending his 50-year run as one of the United States' longest-running fugitives. Fortunately for Moses, the U.S. Supreme Court had already ruled in 2012 that sentencing a juvenile to life imprisonment without parole was cruel and unusual punishment. The stories behind these prison escapes demonstrates the incredible lengths that some individuals will go to gain their freedom. While these individuals may have committed crimes that landed them in jail in the first place, it's hard not to be impressed by their ingenuity and resourcefulness in planning and executing these daring escapes. Despite the best efforts of prison officials to keep their facilities secure, it's clear that where there's a will, there's a way. With that said, thank you for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. And if you found this content helpful, give the video a like. See you in the next video. Till then, take care.